Hello YouTubers, and welcome to another episode of The Baddest. Today we'll be doing the countdown of the top 10 baddest wars in history in terms of death toll. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn notifications on so that you can get such more videos in future. For now, let's go straight up to our top 10 baddest wars in history. At number 10, we'll start with the Mughal Maratha Wars, which took place in India between 1680 and 1707. 27 years of wars in India. The death toll, 5.6 million. The Mughal Maratha Wars, or also known as the Deccan Wars, are the longest recorded military engagements in the history of India, lasting, as we said, 27 years. They are fought between the Marathas and the Mughal Empire. These wars started with the invasion of the Mughal Emperor to Maratha in Bijapur. The Mughal Empire clearly had the advantage, with 3 times soldiers of the Marathas, 500,000, powerful artillery, a cavalry of several thousands of elephants, the empire's treasury, and support of other allies like the Siddhis and the Portuguese. In 1700, Queen Tarabai, the Maratha, was also daughter of a gallant Maratha commander-in-chief, took charge of the Marathas empire. She was successful in bringing this war to an end with a surprise victory in 1707 for the Marathas. Moving on to number 9, 30 Years War. Death toll, 6 million. Place of fighting, Holy Roman Empire, or currently Europe. Between 1618 to 1648, total of 30 years. Initially, this war was between Catholics and Protestants. However, with time it became a general European political war. From 1618 to 1625, the conflict was mainly a German civil war with Protestant German states fighting the Austrian Habsburgs, their German Catholic allies, and Catholic Spain. The Catholic forces were the winners in this stage of fighting. Enter 1625 and Denmark intervenes. Denmark was a Protestant state and in 4 years of fighting was unable to defeat the Catholic armies. In 1630, Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden entered the war. At this point, the motives of the fighting were shifting. True, the Swedes were proud Lutherans determined to defeat the Catholic forces, but another kingdom of France was providing the Swedes with financial support. How, you may ask, since France was Catholic? The last thing France wanted was to be surrounded by the Habsburgs, and a Catholic victory in Germany would just lead to that. The French thus gave money to the Swedes. By 1639, however, the French were directly involved in the fighting, marking a turning point in the European politics away from religion towards the wars of political expediency and conquest. 1648. End of the war with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. Austria was defeated and its hopes for control over Catholic Europe came to nothing. The Peace of Westphalia set the religious and political boundaries for Europe for the next 200 years. Catholic France and Protestant England emerged as the two most powerful European states. Austria-Hungary dominated Central Europe, while Spain was still powerful. Its power was fading fast. Moving on to number 8, the Russia Civil War. Death toll, 6.7 million. Place of fighting, Russia. Between 1917 and 1921, 5 years. The Russia Civil War was a multi-party civil war in the former Russian Empire sparked by the overthrowing of the monarchy and a new republican government under the Bolsheviks. Among the early victims of the civil war were the former imperial family. Tsar Nicholas II, his wife and his children had been moved in 1918. With the development of anti-Bolshevik forces in Siberia, the local Soviet feared that Nicholas may be liberated. Thus, in the night of July 16 to 17, 1918, All the members of the family were taken to a cell of the prison house and shot. In this conflict, the two main warring sides were the Red Army, or the Bolsheviks, and the White Army, the anti-Bolsheviks, who had the support of the Allies. The Red Army eventually successfully defended the newly formed Bolshevik government led by Vladimir. Thus, this ended the monarchy. Number 7. Chinese Civil War. Death toll 9.6 million. Place of fighting China. Years 1927 to 1949. 22 years. The Chinese Civil War was a civil war fought from 1927 to 1949, mainly because of differences in thinking between Chinese Communist Party (CCP) and the Kuomintang (KMT) or Chinese Nationalist Party. The real reason for this war is that it was a fight for legitimacy of the government of China. On October 1, 1949, Chinese Communist leader Mao Zedong declared the creation of a People's Republic of China (PRC). The announcement ended the costly full-scale civil war between CCP and KMT, which broke out immediately following World War II and had been preceded by on-and-off conflict between the two sides since the 1920s. Number 6. Dungan Revolt. Death toll 10 million. Place of fighting China. Years 1862 to 1877. 15 years. This war was mainly based on ethnic disputes. It is said to have started over a simple argument over bamboo poles when a Han merchant was selling poles to a Hui who did not pay the amount the merchant demanded. A background of the two parties involved is that the Hui people of China are predominantly a Muslim group, usually found in the northwestern provinces and central plain, but they are dispersed throughout the country as well. The Han people are non-Muslim, but rather an ethnic group native to East Asia. The uprising of the Hui people occurred along the banks of the Yellow River in Gansu and Shaanxi. The ultimate goal was to create a new Muslim country in those areas. It was a relatively unorganized assault, but it still had bloody results. Roughly more than 50% of the region's people vanished. This war occurred during the Qing dynasty, and the Qing generals eventually acted to end the ethnic war. They retook Xinjiang and stopped the rebellion in 1877. Some of the Hui people fled to Imperial Russia, and the two Hui leaders' corpses were burned alive in full view of the public, thus ending the war. Number 5. An Lushan Rebellion. Death toll 13 million. Place of fighting China. 755 to 763. 8 years. Origins. On December 16, 755, General An Lushan mobilized his army, marching and capturing the Tang eastern capital at Luoyang. He announced the formation of a new empire called the Great Han, with he himself as the first emperor. He continued pushing on to now Xi'an, with the rebel army treating anyone who surrendered well. Thus, many soldiers joined the rebellion. The Tang Empire, however, had 4,000 Arab mercenaries to defend Chang'an against the rebels. The Tang took up highly defensive positions in all mountainous passes leading to the capital and completely blocked An Lushan's progress. An unexpected victory. Just when it seemed that the Han rebel army would have no chance to capture Chang'an, An Lushan's old nemesis, Yang Guozong, made a devastating mistake. He ordered the Tang troops to leave their posts in the mountains and attack An Lushan's enemy on flat ground. An Lushan crushed the Tang and their allies laying the capital to an open attack. End of the rebellion. Despite this win, Anlushan's dynasty soon began to disintegrate from within. January 757, Anlushan's son became upset by his father's threats against his friends at court and killed his father. He was in turn then killed by Anlushan's old friend, Shi Siming. Shi Siming continued the Anlushan program but was later killed by his own son in 761. His son, Shi Shaoyi, proclaimed himself as the new emperor but quickly became quite unpopular with the people. On February 17, 763, Tang troops cut off the young emperor Shi Chaoyi. Rather than facing capture, he committed suicide, bringing an end to the Anlishan rebellion and new empire. Number 4. World War I. Death toll 18.1 million. Place fighting worldwide. Period 1914 to 1918. 4 years. Let's start with the background. The Great War, or World War I, began in 1914 after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria by South Slav nationalists on June 28, 1914. During the conflict, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire fought against Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, Romania, Japan, and from 1917, the United States as well. Results of the war. 4 imperial dynasties collapsed. The Habsburgs of Austria-Hungary, the Hohenzollерns of Germany, the Sultanate of the Ottoman Empire, and the Romanovs of Russia. Start of the war. Because mighty Russia supported Serbia, Austria-Hungary waited to declare war until its leaders received assurance from German leader Kaiser that Germany would support their cause. Austro-Hungarian leaders feared that a Russian intervention would involve Russia's ally France and probably Great Britain as well. On July 5, Kaiser secretly pledged his support, giving Austria-Hungary the so-called carte blanche or blank check assurance of Germany's backing in case of war. The dual monarchy then sent an ultimatum to Serbia, with such harsh terms as to make it almost impossible to accept. Convinced that Austria-Hungary was ready for the war, Serbian government ordered the Serbian army to mobilize and appeal to Russia for assistance. On July 28, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and the tenacious peace between Europe's great powers quickly collapsed. Within a week, Russia, Belgium, France, Great Britain, and Serbia had lined up against Austria-Hungary and Germany, and World War I began. The war. On the eastern front of the World War I, Russian forces invaded the German-held regions of East Prussia and Poland, but were stopped short by German and Austrian forces at the Battle of Tannenberg in late August 1914. Despite the victory, Russia's assault had forced Germany to move 2 corps from the Western Front to the Eastern, contributing to the German loss in the Battle of Marne. Combined with the fierce Allied resistance in France, the ability for Russia's huge war machine to mobilize relatively quickly in the East ensured a longer, more grueling conflict instead of the quick victory that Germany had wished for. The middle part of the war, 1916 and 1917, was dominated by continued trench warfare in both the East and the West. Soldiers fought from dug-in positions in brutal conditions with millions dying, but neither side had substantial success or gained any advantage. Entry of the US and exit of Russia. Up until now, the US had maintained the principle of neutrality as per their President Woodrow Wilson. In 1917, however, 2 very important developments in the war occurred. Widespread protests over sinking of the U-boat of the British Ocean liner traveling from New York to Liverpool with hundreds of American passengers on board in May 1915 helped turn the tide of the American public opinion against Germany. In February 1917, Congress passed $250 million arms appropriation for US to enter the war. Germany continued to sink 4 more US merchant ships the following month, and on April 2nd, President Woodrow Wilson appeared before Congress and declared war against Germany. In early April, the United States, angered by the attacks upon its ships in the Atlantic, declared war against Germany, meaning increased support for the Allies, especially considering the US military strength. In November the same year, the Bolshevik Revolution prompted Russia to pull out of the war. End of the war. Although both sides launched renewed offensives in 1918, it was an all-or-nothing effort to win the war, as the fighting had exhausted and demoralized troops. The Germans lost a number of individual battles and gradually began to fall back. A deadly outbreak of influenza also took heavy tolls on the soldiers on both sides. Eventually, the governments of both Germany and Austria-Hungary began to lose control as both countries experienced multiple mutinies from within their military structures. The war ended in the fall of 1918 after the member countries of the Central Powers signed armistice agreements one by one. Germany was the last to sign this in November 11, 1918. As a result of these agreements, Austria-Hungary was broken into several smaller countries. Germany, and the Treaty of Versailles, was severely punished with hefty economic repercussions, territorial losses, and strict limits on its rights to develop military, bringing an end to World War I. Number 3. Manchu invasion of China. Death toll, 25 million. Place of fighting, China. Years of fighting, 1618 to 1683. 65 years. The Manchu conquest of China was sparked in April 1618 when a tribal leader from the Manchurian region issued a proclamation listing 7 grievances against the Ming dynasty that was in power. When the Ming leaders refused to pay tribute and offer to redress these grievances, he declared himself as founder of the Qing dynasty based on a line of rulers who had dominated China's several countries centuries earlier. For the better part of the next century, there was a continuous battle between the Ming and the Manchu. By 1644, the Ming dynasty had been dramatically weakened and had managed to push the Ming from the capital at Beijing. For the next 4 decades, the Manchus fought against the Ming and rival claimants, consolidating their power and expanding their rule. Number 2, Taiping Rebellion. Death toll, 28.2 million. Place of fighting, China. 1850 to 1864, 14 years. The Taiping Rebellion was a revolt against the Qing dynasty of China, fought with religious conviction over the regional's economic conditions from 1850 to 1864. The Taiping forces were run as a cult-like group called the God Worship Society by self-proclaimed prophet Hong, and resulted in the rebels seizing the city of Nanjing. Background: Hong, born in 1814 in Ganlubu, had failed multiple civil service exams when in 1837 he returned home and went to bed, complaining of sickness. In a feverish state, he hallucinated a journey to a heavenly land to the east where his father revealed that demons were destroying humankind. Wielding a special sword, Hong, with the help of his brother, fought these demons and the king of hell. Following the battle, Hong remained in heaven and took a wife, later having a child together. Eventually, he returned to earth, receiving the title Heavenly King, Lord of the Kingly Way. By 1849, the God-worshipped society had expanded into 4 areas of China, which Hong treated as strategic points in his upcoming battle against the demons. Hong total control of his followers continued to tighten, calling himself the Taiping King. He declared the separation of men and women, with beatings for anyone who defied him. In 1850, alleging that Jesus had urged him to fight from heaven, Hong began to arm his followers. Soon, they were buying gunpowder in bulk and became organized by military rankings. In 1852, the Taiping soldiers struck out Yohang and began a trail of bloodshed that resulted in the control of a significant portion of the land bordering Yangtze River and the city of Tianjin, from which the King Emperor was forced to flee. Hong then took Nanjing, by which time he boasted 2 million followers. After an attempt to seize Beijing was repelled, Hong chose to cease conquest and concentrate on building an administration in Nanjing. The Taiping held Nanjing for 11 years. Hong was however found dead in 1864, believed to have been poisoned, though it is unknown whether it was suicide or an assassination. The Nanjing Revolt, therefore, died years later. And now to number 1, World War II. Casualties 77.1 million. Location worldwide. Between 1913 and 1945, 6 years. The main countries involved in World War II were the Axis powers of Germany, Italy, and Japan, and the Allies, comprised of France, Great Britain, United States, and the Soviet Union. World War II began in Europe on September 1, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. Great Britain and France responded by declaring war on Germany on September 3rd. The war between the USSR and Germany began on June 22, 1941, with Operation Barbarossa, where the Germans invaded the Soviet Union. The war in the Pacific began on December 7th or 8th, 1941, when Japan attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor and other American, Dutch, and British installations throughout Asia. Turning points. The war in the Pacific began against Japan during the Battle of Midway, when an American victory destroyed the Japanese first-line carrier forces, and together with the Battle of Guadalcanal, ended Japan's ability to prosecute an offensive war. The tide of the war in Europe shifted when the Soviet army had a victory over the Battle at Stalingrad on February 1943. More than 1 million Soviet troops and tens of thousands of civilians died in the defense of the city. But the destruction of 2 entire German armies marked the beginning of the end of the Third Reich, end of the war. The Allied landings at Normandy on June 6, 1944, opened a second front in Europe, and Germany's abortive offensive at the Ardennes in the winter of 1944 to 1945 marked the Third Reich's final push in the West. The Red Army advanced from the east and effectively claimed all territory under its control for the Soviet sphere. The Allied armies converged on Berlin. Adolf Hitler committed suicide on April 30, 1945, and the war in Europe ended on May 8th. Hundreds of thousands were killed in fire bombings of Japanese cities and the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 finally knocked Japan out of the war, bringing an end to the bloody World War II. And World War I brings us to the end of today's countdown, the baddest wars in history. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like this video and click the subscribe button, as well as turn on notifications to view our future videos. Also check out our journal in the Amazon link below in this video. Till next time, keep it baddest.